Welcome, everyone, or hopefully welcome back to the business of higher ed. Before I go into my whole spiel, I want to introduce our higher ed expert, Mike Newcomb. Mike, how are you doing today?
Doing really good. Been having a lot of activity in the higher education space. A lot of people are coming to ask me lots of different questions. So looking forward to this session.
Yeah, that's awesome. Some very cool stuff going on. I'm Lauren Malhoit. I am in charge of higher ed marketing at Juniper. And today we will be talking about simplified operations or simplifying operations. This is a live session. So not only does that mean that my dog could bark at any time, which is very exciting for all of us, but it means you can ask questions at any time too. And we'll do our best to try and answer those in this meeting or we'll reach out to you afterward. So with that, Mike, let's get started. I was thinking, let's start at the beginning. So things like deployments and migrations. We talk a lot about wireless, wired on these calls. We talk a lot about AI and our AI-driven enterprise. So let's go ahead and start with wireless. I know there's a really cool Dartmouth use case, how they deployed a crazy amount of APs in like 3 hours or something. Tell us a little bit more about that story.
Oh, sure. Yeah. So the whole thing about operational simplicity obviously starts with the platform that accommodates that simplicity, right? And the fact that we do everything in the cloud really changes the game. It's why there's been a paradigm shift in networking. And I know on other calls we've talked a little bit about this complex controller architecture and what it means and how that central point of failure causes problems. But to do what Dartmouth did really takes a different kind of architecture. And I love to tell this story because it's one that really resonates when you have been in my world where you've actually had to implement wireless networks. And if you remember, if I was to talk about simplicity, we have to do a single access point may take 3 hours in some cases, or to do a building sometimes could take that many. So when they were looking at the daunting task of installing 2,000 access points in the dorms, you have to ask, how can you do this? How many months is it going to take? Is this going to be all over the summer? And I love the story because that's where we start. How long would it take you, Lauren, if I had to say, hey, Lauren, you got to install 2,000 access points. I want you to do it. Can you do it? And, your response would go, sure, give me 6 months, 5 months, 3 months, whatever. But that's right. That's the typical response. And in the case of Dartmouth, they installed in 48 hours. They installed 2,000 access points. Every single one up and running. They basically had their student workers go out, and I think on the first day they installed 1,400. And the only reason they didn't do them all was the student workers wanted more time.
Yeah, make that money.
Yeah, another lunch, I guess, whatever. But they get so they let it go the last ones to do the next day, because otherwise they would have done 24 hours. They would have done 2,000. But these student workers ran out to all the dorms and everything, and all they had to do was take our access point, their access point, the Cisco one in this case, unplug it from the bracket, plug ours in, plug it in, and authenticated and was up and running in seconds. So that's how fast it is. That's simplification at its highest bet. When we do these things, even when we're in competitive RFP environments and stuff where people are trying to evaluate, we've had customers that when we didn't know that we came up a little bit late in terms of to the dance, and they were looking at our competitors, and they said, well, you can try, but these guys have been doing it for 3 weeks to get their stuff up and running. And we came in, implemented it in an afternoon, and left. And they were like, where are you? Aren't you going to do it? I go, we're already up and running.
We've already found problems with the rest of your infrastructure.
They immediately stopped and said, no, this is what we want. If it takes that long to do a demo, how long, so that's, again, simplified operations that go along with that.
That's amazing. I mean, it's just such a cool story. I know we talk about it a lot, but there really is no better way to just showcase how easy deployments can be. A lot of folks, as you mentioned, will be probably migrating from a controller-based architecture. Do you have much information on that? How are they moving from this controller-based architecture to then, Miss cloud architecture?
Absolutely, yeah. So what we find is they'll usually start in a space and then start to migrate out. We were just on a call yesterday with a university in Texas that has now made that full migration. They've told everybody on this call that don't worry about migrating from this difficult environment. It just gets simpler and simpler and simpler as we go along. And I love this. Another one of those stories you just love to tell is that they said when we started doing this thing, they would have, for example, a controller go out and it would take out their whole campus. That's a problem, right? That's a massive outage, and people are all hands on deck. In our case, because we're all up in the cloud, let's just say you do have a problem where you've lost your internet connection, right? So they told the story of, number one, they realized that in the controller architecture, there was this complex single point of failure. One thing can take out their entire campus Wi-Fi network in one fell swoop. Versus what we do, it's all in the cloud. And if you do happen to lose your internet connection to the outside world, it doesn't stop. And they said, this is the thing. The students hardly knew about it because they knew they couldn't get to the internet, but every service on the campus was available. So that's a simplicity, again, another move towards simplicity, because they said, now we've eliminated all this extra hardware stuff to manage in our data centers. We just kind of migrated them out. And as we did it, and they did that. And there's a couple of Texas universities that are kind of taking different approaches, but in essence, they just kind of just take a building, move it. And they find that there's absolutely no issue. In fact, the other part of simplicity is the knowledge that it takes to do these things. And a lot of people, some people have their own built-in biases toward other vendors, don't want to do it. But in the case of all the people that have done this, the people that couldn't adapt, they decided to leave. But the people that came in loved it. And because it's so quick and easy to learn, you're able to be the Scotty of the Star Trek Enterprise, because they don't have to know how easy it is to fix it, but they fix it so quickly before anybody knows about it. So simplicity at its best.
So yeah, it's a real beam me up situation.
Yes, exactly right.
I had to say it. Like, well, I know that the Mist Edge is something that we've been talking to a lot of schools about, and some have decided they're really into it, they love it, and others have been really into it and decided to go another route, just using Mist APs without the Edge. So can you tell me a little bit about what's behind that decision making, and how does the Mist Edge help simplify operations?
Oh, sure. Well, so, the one thing that's really unique about the Mist Edge, is that if you think of a controller-based architecture, the reason it was done was to centralize the management and the ability in a single place. And a lot of times people don't want to go about taking and redistributing their VLANs and here's how and remapping everything. So big universities, for example, that have been built around the controller architecture, basically get rid of their controllers and they put our Mist Edge in, which is not a controller. It's a VPN concentrator, for example, right? So it allows them to have that single point that makes it so easy to migrate from a controller architecture because they don't change anything. And then as they want to distribute, they can distribute out, right? So it's very easy. And so people do that because it just makes it a lot easier to do that. The other thing that it did for some of them was when, especially during the era of COVID, there was a lot of issues with how do I take care of my professors at home and the experience that they're getting, right? And this is where me being a professor and having to experience it myself of going home, you realize that, number one, usually the university doesn't help you diagnose your home network, right? They just don't. But by putting our access point at their home and being able to have it connected to Mist Edge, it changed the dynamic, made it simpler for them to be on it because they no longer had to run a VPN to get on the network, right? And I think anybody that's run a VPN on the network knows, on their home network, knows that your 1 gigabit bandwidth to your home, maybe if you got Cox or one of these guys that do almost a gig, drops down to like 30 meg because of that pressure. So not having to do that, but have the same security profile at home is important. And then there's the experience of the professor delivering that message to their students of when they're teaching. What happens? And we had a situation where when we had an individual that says, "Oh, I don't understand what's going on." Now, normally the university will say, figure it out. But because we had this in this particular situation, it was a whole missed environment. We were immediately able to look into it and said, hey, did you know that when you were teaching at that time, your gateway was overloaded, and it was overloaded with almost 80% of the traffic being streaming traffic. Are your kids running Netflix, Amazon Prime, HBO Max? And he goes, oh yeah. So he was able to take corrective action, and then with Mist Edge being able to create its own secure access onto the university network made a difference. So again, simplified the teaching part as well as what we, on how the poor university IT staff had to support him to make him a better professor.
Yeah, I mean, what's the first thing we do before this call or any video call is turn off the VPN.
That's right.
Things just don't work quickly when you have the VPN on. So I think that's a fantastic use case. Also, I just kind of want to point out, that ability to troubleshoot. So we can actually automate doing a packet capture when we know anything's wrong. So there's no truck rolls or visiting people's homes, a professor's home to try and get, tap the network and get some sort of packet capture there. It's just automated, and then you get it, at central office, or if IT's at home, you can see it there, right?
Well, in fact, when we talk about that particular aspect of it, and this is something that is often sometimes misunderstood with how other people do it. In the world of diagnosing the network, you got to do your packet captures, and you got to go say, okay, let me drag this poor person back that had the bad experience and make them go do it, right? You don't even have to turn it on with us. 150 pre and post data points are constantly going up to the cloud and stored for 30 days. Packet captures are immediately on the access point. So if you wanted to say what happened at 2:00 on Thursday of last week, and because that's when he had the thing, and you realize, oh, well, that's when we did the upgrade to our DHCP server. And so you say, oh my gosh, that's why he's having a bad experience, because something is not authenticating correctly. So there's things like that. And because it's not you having to go say, let me turn it on when I need it, because you don't do it because you say, oh, it takes up bandwidth in a lot of cases. This takes up nothing. It's all there. It's in the cloud, and it's as simple can be.
Yeah, I remember the days of mirroring and spanning ports just for hours, just hoping something would go wrong. So at least you'd have that, something to look at. And oftentimes everything worked perfectly during the times you needed it to go wrong, so you could do some troubleshooting. So, absolutely. I mean, that is just fantastic. And I bet huge for any networking person who's used to doing that kind of thing. I know in the past we have talked about, I think it was on our reducing costs episode, if you will, the PoE, the power over Ethernet. I know a lot of new APs, especially the Wi-Fi 6 APs, require a ton of power, and PoE switches may not be able to cover that. So I would just want to talk about it from a simplifying operations, not even having to order those AC adapters.
Right.
From a ease of procurement operations, right? But I don't know if you had any other thoughts on the PoE switches and kind of the power usage for the APs.
Yeah, no. So, and this actually happened about 2 weeks ago when we first talked about it, and that was this particular university was going to put in a Wi-Fi 6 access point from one of our competitors. And when number one, it wouldn't authenticate with a switch. It was not the switch vendor and the network vendor were not the same. Neither of them were us, by the way, but they came to us for advice. I thought that was nice. But because the one profile was a proprietary kind of profile, it didn't work with just somebody else's switch. And then they realized that even when it did come up, it wouldn't come up at full power because there wasn't enough power on the switch. Because to do the full power, you needed this huge amount of extra electricity to power that thing. And so what it meant to them is if they were going to continue down the path with these other guys' Wi-Fi 6, and you look at the power profile to run their whole stack and do everything, it meant that they would have to upgrade all their switches from pancake switches to even maybe chassis switches or do some other power adapter or whatever just to accommodate one access point. And so it really suddenly the costs bloom on the data center side or where your switches are all housed. It bloomed because now you've got to have these bigger, massive switches that handle a lot more power over Ethernet. Versus us, our power draw is very low, and it's always been very low. We're very effective. And in considering the fact that in what we do has our Wi-Fi antenna, which is great, our Bluetooth, which gives us this league-leading ability to diagnose where somebody is within 1 to 3 meters, and telemetry on a single box, to have that less wattage to run, less PoE needed, means you can use lesser cost switches if you desire to. So.
Yeah, just very cool things that we're doing there, and it's amazing that we're able to keep the power down so much in our APs, and that's important to us. We're thinking about the customer, so that's very cool. You brought in switches and wired connections, so I just want to cover that real quick because I know we're at the end here, but being able to use the same platform, for example, and use Marvis or use predictive actions and insights that we get from the same platform for wired and wireless, and truly having a self-driving network between the two. Tell us a little bit more about how that would simplify operations for everyone.
Oh, absolutely. So, there's a term that we often use called mean time to innocence. So when somebody says your Wi-Fi sucks or your network sucks, they'll look at you and say, hey, you got a problem. And you have to defend yourself. And a lot of times that may take days and weeks to figure out. But with Marvis, it's not that case. And the fact is, it could be a bad cable on a switch. And to be able to have Marvis, when the student worker comes in, says, how's my network today? And actually types English language query. And it says, you've got a problem, and the coffee table, you've got bad cables that are showing up here, here, and here, because it's always watching. Right. And so that simplifies that operation to know that it's not just the Wi-Fi, it's this bad cable. Or it says, this user has had a bad experience when they're over there. Now, it may look like Wi-Fi because he's like, I don't know what's going on. I can't get to my stuff. You guys, your Wi-Fi stinks. And then, again, to be able to know, in many cases, before they realize what has happened or had a chance to call you, you can also know that it is the fact that missing VLANs on that switch in that closet, which prevents them from accessing what they want. So, so wherever they're going through that particular building, that VLAN didn't exist in that switch. So simplifying the operations means incorporating the wired, the wireless, the routing, the security, and then the high speed stuff going on the WAN. All that stuff needs to be brought into a single entity, and that's what simplifying applications is about, and as well as the SD-WAN. Let's not forget that too. So
yeah. I mean, imagine how long it would take to just do all of the CLI hunting and pouring through all the logs. It'd take days, if not weeks, to figure that out. And to have Marvis just, you say, who's unhappy on my network right now?
Right.
Marvis is like, here they are, and here's why. So yeah, it's always good to end on the unhappy users bit,
Yes.
using that natural language. Mike, I think we're at the end. I would love to cover more about SD-WAN, about data center.
Yep.
Obviously, there's a lot of simplifying of operations to be done there in similar ways. You kind of touched on it, but is there any last thoughts that you want to share with everyone before?
Yeah. So we talk a lot about AI here, about the switching, but we haven't talked a lot about how we also simplify operations. For example, with remote access, branch access, right? In a future topic, we may cover in more detail exactly how we have a tunnelless architecture with secure session routing to allow you to eliminate all these weird little tunnels that you have to create that cost you a lot of money to be able to do a service from point A to point B. We make it completely tunnelless, which simplifies that, reduces the cost of that architecture as well. So, we'll talk about that more in details, but this whole mantra of our AI engine on top of everything is how we're going to deliver that level of consistent simplification of operations across from endpoint to endpoint.
Yeah, awesome. Well, and that brings up a good point. Everyone out there, feel free to let us know if you want certain topics covered or certain parts of the portfolio covered. We're more than happy to. But with that, thanks so much, Mike. Thank you all for watching, and we'll see you next week when Jamie and Kia talk about health and well-being.
Yes.
All right. Thanks, everyone.
Everybody. Take care.
You too.